Welcome to Green is the Colour, Football is the Game, which is a session dedicated to sustainability in sports broadcasting and production. We're going to delve deep into the results of the IBC Accelerator for Sustainability and Live Sports Production project. And then we're going to widen out the discussion to how the industry can continue to work towards achieving net zero carbon emissions from sports OBs. Joining me to do that are Andy Beale, Chief Engineer, BT Sport; Joe Finon, Manager Responsible Production, Sky Sports; Rachael Nightingale, Head of Broadcast Operations, Premier League; and Lawrence Windley, Senior Product Manager, BBC, and some more bits on the end to your BBC part. But I've only got BBC written down here, so we'll go with that. Good man. Thank you for all you for joining us. Before we start, it's worth noting that we're going to be talking a lot about power and travel, which are two main areas of concern for sports production, and both of these will affect and can be affected by pretty much all of you in this room. Similarly, sustainability is not one of those fashionable illities that's sort of a nice to have. It's fundamental that we address this together. As such, I'm hoping this session will have something for all of you, whether you're a league, federation, producer, broadcaster, supplier, or vendor. To kick things off, we're going to talk about how using the cloud could help us to become more sustainable. And we're going to focus, as I said, on the findings of the IBC Accelerator Challenge. Before we talk about it, let's see a short video explainer.
The IBC Sustainable Live Production Accelerator is an exciting investigation into the way in which live content could be produced in the future.
Cancelo for Sterling! Absolutely divine!
Now, normally, of course, we all produce football independently, we operate as rivals, but for something as important as this, we're coming together because there is a climate emergency.
UK Premier League broadcasters have come together with the support of the Premier League, international broadcasters and several key suppliers to review the impact cloud productions can have on our carbon footprint. This unique collaborative initiative will help us better understand the challenges that we face as an industry and the areas which need further research and new solutions.
Diogo Jota! So cool! 2-0!
As a collective, we will be analysing our work with the assistance of the BAFTA-affiliated Albert Consortium, who will be reviewing the data from the project.
One back by White. Sissoko stopped him. Smith Rowe! Sweet as you like!
This project's findings will enable Albert to make our measurement tool even more comprehensive. Our tools are available to anyone involved in live production to measure their impact, and with more virtual productions using the calculator, it's more relevant than ever.
In by Azpilicueta. Chilwell!
We'll continue to provide practical tips and advice on innovative ways that we can all make our productions more sustainable, both now and in the future. And we look forward to sharing the findings with the industry.
Andy, tell us about the project. What did you do? Why were you doing it? Who were you working with?
Okay, thanks, Will. Hi, everyone. So this project came about through the IBC Accelerator concept, a concept which is about trying to find real-world solutions, problems that as broadcasters or content producers we face, and trying to pull together a lot of stakeholders, industry stakeholders, to try and find solutions to those problems. And Mike Ward from Singular actually proposed the idea of challenging the relevance of cloud production to solving this big problem, as you've described well, about being more sustainable. And we all know we have to address the climate emergency. Now it's an economic emergency with power supply challenges on the horizon because of things happening in East Europe. But so Mike proposed the idea, and we came together and sort of scoped up what we thought the project might include. And if you've been to lots of conferences, IBCs, NABs, SVG, we've heard lots of suppliers talk about their cloud solutions offering a solution to this. And we've all got commitments to be carbon net zero within this decade. And so we really wanted to challenge those claims. Would cloud production technology really reduce our carbon footprint fundamentally? But then, of course, it's not just does it reduce the carbon footprint, are those tools fit for purpose? You know, I saw very well forcing our friends in production to use new tool sets, but if they make their lives difficult or they can't tell the story that they need to, then clearly that's going to be a blocker. So we was then challenging other things like, are the tools really ready? Are they fit for purpose? Are these cloud solutions secure? We're dealing with really high value rights that we're guardians of that are really super valuable if we're going to be pushing these streams into the cloud and exchanging them, interoperating between all the partners here. Would they remain safe and secure and avoid piracy and everything else? And so that was the real concept of the project. So we came together, and the thing we had in common, Mike had approached Sky originally and us, and the thing we realised we had in common is we're all Premier League rights holders. So we reached out to our friends at the Premier League who were very supportive because we've all been working together for a long time on the EcoB project and other things, and decided we would try and set ourselves a challenge of taking one game in the calendar and collaboratively working together, breaking the parts of that game down individually and taking responsibility for different bits to see whether we could make it work. So the way it fell in the end, because of dates and things, we chose an OB which has actually a BT game, but it doesn't really matter. And Sky took on the sort of responsibility for the host production part of that. So they came to our compound and plugged in the cloud ingress tools to the back of our OB, ingested those feeds into their cloud. They ran a completely separate cloud instance and did all the things you'd expect a host broadcaster to do. And it was a cut-down version, obviously. We didn't have 24 cameras and super slow-mos, but we took 8 cameras from the host, and Sky produced with their AWS instance and the tools they were running remotely from Stockley Park, produced a proper world feed, which we syndicated and the PLP syndicated. And so we then took the BT version of that world feed, and we then did the presentation at bolt-on like we would be doing anyway. That's already remote, of course, but in more traditional terms. And a team at Stratford remote produced or cloud produced the full presentation wrap. And then PLP made some feeds available into the cloud, which we cloud converted for international distribution. And then our friends at the BBC did a match of the day equivalent production, taking those feeds, ingesting them for file-based post-production, and Lawrence was frantically editing a highlights package for a virtual match of the day show.
Thank you. That's the partners again. Having done that, Joe, what are the key findings or what was the biggest eye-opener from all that?
So firstly, we wanted to take the opportunity to really understand a couple of points that we hadn't had the opportunity to do before. Connectivity, had been our scope. So we really wanted to understand the impact of cloud production on connectivity, and also the cloud providers. We really wanted to understand what impact that had. The biggest findings, though, were the infrastructure behind the scenes. So the difference between remote production and cloud production, we both found that it was the technical equipment room. So actually, the gallery differences reduced the power consumption for our element by 70%, which is massive. And actually, I just realised it's really topical that we're actually talking about this subject after Game 0, which was obviously the first Net Zero broadcast, which we worked together with in September on as well. So yeah, it was really great collaborative project that really highlighted the benefits of cloud production when it comes to your gallery footprint.
And just to clarify, you're comparing cloud with remote, not cloud with traditional OB. Absolutely.
We all know that the difference between remote and traditional, the benefits there, the travel reduction, also the other elements of the work-life balance benefits as well. So for this project, we really wanted to concentrate on the difference between cloud and remote. And yes, there was a saving from the power reduction.
And what can we take forward from these learnings, Joe? Which bit of that do we then? Is it the gallery is the key part? Is it?
Yeah, and that's absolutely our takeaway. Yeah. That it's also, we've had discussions about the scalability as well, and the opportunities for the host broadcasters to support those on site to actually reduce the facilities because of the accessibility of the feeds.
Thank you. Rachael, just to put in a bit of context, what role did the Premier League play in all this? And I guess why did you take on the responsibility?
So I don't know how much people or the audience here already know about our EcoOB initiative, which Andy mentioned previously, but back in 2018, the rights holders in the UK, the people sitting at this table, our production partners at IMG, Premier League Productions, came together collaboratively to try and start to solve some of the sustainability aims. But we all had very little idea about how to actually do that. And so we worked with BAFTA on the Albert programme, and we sort of did a collaborative group, which we have continued to run. So this project was really sort of an extension of the work we were already doing with the EcoOB group and that we continue to run and work together on. Of course, we were happy to support anything we could do to try and work to find ways to work more sustainably, to cut our carbon. As, again, Andy said earlier, we all need to work towards these 10-year targets, and of course it's really important that we do it in any way we can. But the best thing about this forum, both working with the IBC, working together in this group, is that we do it in a way that we come together to set best practice and agree it as a group. So you haven't got everyone going off down a separate path and then trying to reconcile that at a later point. So really, really important that we do it that way. And of course, that's why we've sort of been an integral part. But I have to be honest and say, you know, it's the expertise of the people on this panel, not myself. We're here in a supportive role and to try and gain access where we can provide it. And of course, provide permissions for things like feeds and security of things in the cloud.
Absolutely, but we will come back to that role in a bit. So back to the cloud, Lawrence. We're talking about something here, but broadcasters generally want the best of breed, don't they? They want the best product available. Are all the parts of the chain available in the cloud?
Yeah, well, I think certainly remote production and cloud-based tools for broadcast application have moved on considerably. COVID has played a large part in that. So in terms of, I see kind of three different tiers, if you like, of tools that are now available. One are the cloud-enabled, which is where the traditional, we use the traditional on-premise tin. That will be supplemented by some cloud-enabled capabilities. There's the cloud-based, which is effectively what we did for this sustainability challenge. We built in AWS some Premier editing stations, graphics rendering stations, some shared storage. So that was all cloud-based, but effectively you're saying we were recreating what we would do on-premise in Salford, but we're doing it in the cloud. And then there's the cloud-native layer. So that's the kind of the new entrants, the disruptors, who will take something end-to-end and it is entirely cloud-native. So I'm thinking about the providers of clipping solutions and that kind of thing. So for us, I think it was interesting to be able to say we could take our existing workflow, manage it in the cloud in a very similar way with my freelance editor and my graphics op, except they were based at home rather than going into Salford to do the job. So in that respect, it was a great success. I think the challenges that we have collectively, and that's for us as users, it's for vendors and the supply chain, is the extra bits that kind of make a broadcast workflow. So I'm thinking about monitoring. We've got disparate parts that are glued together in AWS. How do we monitor things? How do we review and approve? NDI obviously comes into that. So I would say not quite ready for prime time in terms of the production team experience, but certainly technically possible. And I don't think, certainly 2 years ago, that the maturity of the available compute resources and remote access technologies was there. So from our point of view, great success, and we're going to do more in the future.
Do we have to compromise, though? Are there compromises we have to make? Is that, if I'm reading between the lines there, you are having to make some compromises?
I think it's about how much effort we put into those other pieces. A lot of the traditional vendors, you know, will give you a nice walled garden of it's an end-to-end production chain. It all works together nicely. Once you step out into the cloud arena, you start to have integration issues. You start to have expectations about reliability that are more IP-based maybe than broadcast-based. I come from a frame of black on an output. A broadcast output is unthinkable, isn't it? But those kind of outages are maybe not so unthinkable in terms of compute resources in clouds. So yes, there are some compromises, but I'm sure they can be overcome. It used to be the case that from a BBC editorial point of view, we would say, okay, we want to cover this event. Can we afford to do it? And then technically, how do we do it? We've changed that now with our commitment to the sustainability of these kind of things to say, well, editorially, what do we want to do? And can we do that sustainably? And if we can't, we don't do it. So I think the some of the compromises that Will's alluding to there are probably going to have to be made, and we've got to bring the production teams with us on that.
It's brilliant that you've flipped that round, which is fantastic. I'll ask Andy, as he also sits in a similar sort of, has a similar sort of conversations, I suspect. Do production teams actually want to work this way? If not, how do we change that narrative?
I think, so there's two things, right? So just to pick up on the end of the previous question, what I would say, my observation from a technology-specific point of view about the limitations, that we did find limitations, no question, and that was part of the objective, was to find the holes. But if you look at the technical evolution of in the broadcast space in the last 5 years, and you compare some more traditional, I mentioned this at other events, more traditional broadcast tech like 2110, if you look at what's happened to that in that space in 5 years, it's actually quite tedious and slow. And if you look at what's happened in the cloud space 5 years ago to now, it's totally unrecognisable, and the speed of change is so rapid, and Joe will, I'm sure, pick up on this because we talked about this the other day, the speed of change is so rapid that the problems are fixed almost in real time, because it's code dev, because it's DevOps, because it's code, because it's cloud, and that's the difference. You can spot these changes, the team who are behind it can go away and work on them, implement, so that it's really, really rapid. So there are problems, but the ability to move on really quickly, and that's why I think it's such exciting technology. To your point about production, though, I think the really big challenge happened in COVID. It was a hearts and minds piece. It was do the production team need to be able to, as we used to say, touch the grass, smell the grass, or are they happy to not be on site? And it was that not being on site challenge, which was the big one. And if you talk to Jamie Oakford, who I don't know if he's still here or not, who would have probably said 2 years ago he had to be here as a match director, but now he's really, really happy, very happy, being in a remote operations centre, much more comfortable. He's still got all the tools he needs. He's got all the views he needs. He's got all the talkback he needs. He would say this. He's super happy and really comfortable doing that. You trust the people on the ground for you. We still have floor managers, and so you trust the people implicitly. But that problem, that's changed. That's gone. COVID made that happen. And actually, I think the important thing is the production don't necessarily need to know. And that's the key criteria. If production can sit down, it doesn't matter. They don't need to know whether the vision mixer they're controlling is in the room behind them, is it remotely in a truck, or is it in the cloud? It doesn't really matter, and they shouldn't know. We shouldn't be asking them to do it if they do know. And if they don't know, they can still make the same programs, the same storytelling they used to do, then we're fine. And that's, I think, we're not very far away from that.
Good. Joe, we talked about the benefits versus remote, but is this way of working right for all matches, leagues? Or does it still have to be the right way to go, if you see what I mean? So,
from Sky's perspective, we would always want to review what this production is, what's required, what's currently available, before we would make any blanket decisions. So it will always be the case that we will look at actually what you're producing. I'm sure that's the same for yourselves in BBC.
Excellent. Let's move away from the cloud. Let's talk about the exciting world of biofuels.
Topical.
So, yeah, absolutely right. So they're becoming more widely available, but they've been considered very, very expensive. Joe, this is your specialist subject. If you appear on Mastermind, Joe will be doing biofuels. What are the carbon gains versus the financial outlay, and does it make financial sense for an outside broadcast?
So with biofuels are not the end goal. So biofuels are currently going in combustible engines, right? The end goal is that we don't have them on site. Twin-set diesel generators are not sustainable. We shouldn't be using them, and that's why it's a call to arms to all the suppliers, all the manufacturers, to actually reduce the power requirements on site so we don't need to have them. Yeah? However, yes, in the past, biofuels have been slightly more expensive than the diesel alternatives, but at Sky and all the other broadcasters, I'm absolutely sure we know that it's the right thing to do, because a lot of the times our generators or our scanners are traveling around the country, parking in streets, parking next to schools, parking near houses. Actually, to put those emissions out into those environments is not good working practices, it's not what we want to do, it's not the right thing. So biofuels allows us to transition away from them, reducing our emissions by 90%, which is massive. I'm frustrated I don't have shares in the company. But it's absolutely not the end goal. And of course, the prices will be fluctuating wildly.
We'll come up with a plug-in for, so Winter Watch which by definition is one of these kind of OBs that we do regularly. This year we actually did it with hydrogen.
Last year as well.
Yeah, so that is more sustainable.
There's your headline. Let's have another hot topic, travel. Whether it's remote production or the cloud, we still need crew on site. We're still going to need camera ops. Paul McNamara, Jamie Oakford, they want their best guys or best gals on the key cameras. But realistically, to reduce travel, we just need to have the nearest guys or gals. So how do we square that circle? Anybody?
It's always going to be a challenge. You're always going to want that demand. Sky's, for a long time, had regional crewing, so North Crew, South Crew. Of course, everyone is investing in regional hubs to try and decrease the amount of travel there as well. But we know the way to drive this change is through education, to make sure that everyone is aware of why we need to make these changes. We want to be around in 2050. We want to be traveling around the country to cover these matches in 2050. And how can you do that when you are putting such a footprint out there? The other thing to mention here as well is the carbon footprints that are associated with those previously have been very cheap to offset. There is going to be more scrutiny on our carbon footprints going forward as to offset those footprints increases. So I don't know if you've got anything from BT's perspective on regional crewing?
I think we have a similar philosophy to you guys. Always ambition is to do that, and it was successful when we had things north of the border as well. We had regional crews. But you're right, it's always that tension between creative choice of staff, and I'm not going to pretend we're perfect, we're not, but it's certainly something we work towards, and where we can, we certainly do crew regionally.
Still on the subject of remote production, there's skeptics, including myself, will suggest that if we're not careful, we're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. So people, rather than going to Hewish Park, are going to go to High Wycombe, right? But they're still travelling. So to use Lawrence's analogy, it's a bit like a balloon animal. If we squeeze it at one end, the problem just becomes bigger elsewhere. So, Lawrence, you can answer this as it was your example. In every sense, how do we ensure we don't just move the carbon footprint from someone or somewhere to somewhere else in the chain?
I think it's clear that we can't offset our way out of the problem. We've got a commitment of the BBC to be net zero by 2030. As the home of Sir David Attenborough, who was showing all these beautiful, the beautiful planet we live on, we are seriously committed to actually becoming, better than net zero. How do we? I think it's a call to arms, isn't it, for everybody? In this room, we've got suppliers, we've got freelancers, broadcasters, rights holders, etc. We've all got to do our bit. I mean, there's an old phrase in broadcasting, isn't there, which is, well, it was fine leaving me, but we can't adopt that attitude to climate change. So I think we're also looking at what we buy, the entire supply chain working with us, shall we say, in order to achieve that, really serious reductions in the amount of impact that we have on the environment. So we're looking for everyone to help in that.
On that note, you lot are going to love this. Everyone loves a bit of audience participation, right? So I need anybody who works for a broadcaster, federation, or production company to please raise their hand. Please keep your hand raised if sustainability is an important consideration every time you cover a match, tournament, or event. Most of those hands stayed up. Same thing now for suppliers. If you work for an OB company or an RF or a specialist camera company, please raise your hand. Please keep it raised if sustainability is an important consideration every time you do an event. Most people kept their hands up. And finally, that's good. Yeah. If you're a technology vendor or a product developer, please raise your hand.
Majority of the room.
Yeah, right, we're ready. This is the key one. Please keep your hand raised if sustainability is an important consideration at your company. I saw some hands go down. Right, so I wasn't trying to pick on you, but trying to make a point. First of all, reflect on that. So there seems to be a sort of chain down effect here. So broadcasters, producers, federations, and I'm very impressed to say suppliers as well, seem to understand the benefits. If people don't understand the benefits, how do we sell the idea to them, or how do they reap other benefits from working this way? Because there are other ways you can benefit from this that aren't just environmental. So how do we sell this to the people that perhaps didn't keep their hands up?
It's a great response in the room. I think 2 or 3 years ago, the sell would have been a lot harder.
Yeah.
I actually think the sell's pretty straightforward now, because I think everyone understands, because we're starting to now see, for us, we can't do this without suppliers. Right? BT Sport, I hope I can speak on everyone's behalf, Sky, BBC can't meet our carbon net zero 2030 goal on our own, right? We all rely on our partners and suppliers, and in turn, their supply chain to help us reach that. And therefore, hook or by crook, either with friendly engagement or commercial pressure through RFPs, this will become the way we have to work with all of our partners. And so, but I think that's not going to be necessary. I think we haven't got to use that really tight leverage of RFPs mandating. I think people want to come on the journey with us, and we see more and more now, all of our partners coming to us saying, actually, we've had an idea, or can we talk about how we can do something differently? And what's really interesting is in our own businesses now, people who work for us are coming to us and saying, I've thought about this, can we do that? I want to change that. It really upsets me we don't do this. It's really coming from within. We don't necessarily need to lead from the front as much, because it's really brilliant and really encouraging that this is something which is now everyone's now got on their agenda. Well, for us, certainly, we see that.
Absolutely, and I've been here before, and we've spoken about this, and it goes back to the sell and the RFP point. We have been working with our suppliers for a long time. We've shared what our responsible business targets with everyone that will listen to say, like, put the pressure on your supply chain. We are also making those grounds for dismissal if they're not meeting those targets. And also we are including a life cycle of the products as well. So the suppliers, and then looking at their supply chain, looking at actually what they're providing, how are they giving that service, what is the kit, and actually what happens at the end of life on that as well, and actually how is that provider reducing the power consumption.
Lawrence, have you got a take on that?
Yeah, I was going to say that about 100% of BBC Studios output is Albert certified, and about 50% of the, 48% was the figures I've actually got, of BBC output is Albert certified. So in other words, it's, sustainable. So one of the good things about the Accelerator project that we worked on was that we've now got some real metrics about power consumption in particular, about doing it cloud-based, because as I was saying earlier, if we're going to make those decisions about, well, it is doing this sustainable, you need to do that on the basis of some real data.
And the CapEx requests as well, when you're putting those forward to your powers that be, actually having that data and saying, yes, okay, it's going to cost us X, but it's going to reduce our emissions by Y, is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think you'll find that the sustainability and the, if you like, green credentials of vendors and suppliers is no longer Appendix 4 of the RFP. It's right up there now. Well, it has to be.
Is it a non-negotiable now then? Is that what we're saying?
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
You heard it here first. Bringing it back to the top of the chain, Rachel, you didn't lead this project, you supported it. If there's other federations out there, or leagues, or whatever, that wanted to do something like this, what advice would you give them?
I think it's probably fair to say that we got involved in this because our rights holders requested us to, as I say, back in 2018, and that's obviously set a journey for us that we're all on together now. I would recommend to any other leagues or any other businesses in the same position just to listen to what you're being asked to do. So whether it's your partners or whether it's, you're trying to transform your business to be ready for 10 years' time or whatever it might be, just really listen and just start with something small. So for us, it was for us to support with the conversation with Albert and how we would get them to be more appropriately set up for sports broadcast. And of course, that huge piece of work took place with everyone working together. And now we're all able to use a calculator that is more specific for a sports broadcast. And we continue to work together on that to drive that forward. And, some of the things we found out through this project, this specific one as well, is that actually certain areas weren't being calculated. So we're now working on that. I think, you know, just start with something, whether it's a change to biofuel, if you're doing outside broadcast, that's going to save a lot of carbon, whilst the industry catches up and whilst we all work out how do we move away from using those generators on site. And we're sat at a football club today, one of which is a member club for the Premier League. We have a fantastic stadium here, state of the art. You know, it could be very easy to say, well, we'll just ask the club to do something instead. And it's that point about, yes, squeezing the balloon and making sure that what we're actually doing is meaningful and we're not just taking small steps to push it somewhere else and hide it elsewhere. So that would be my advice. We do run our EcoOB group, and we do have some shared findings from that, which we're really happy to share. We've had some other leagues start to come and make an appearance at that, and I would say, whilst it's a relatively informal Premier League setup, we are very willing to share everything we've jointly found, because this is about best practice.
Thank you. If anybody wants to talk to Rachael, she's around for a little while longer to share all that information. And we're out of time. Does anybody want to add anything before we jump off the stage?
I think I'd say, we talked a lot earlier, the other panellists did, about engagement, you know, fan engagement and the passion that particularly football engenders in that fan base. And they're going to be as passionate about the environment and what we need to do to be more sustainable as we are. So I think we've got a great opportunity, the people in this room have got great opportunities to kind of use that and leverage it for the greater good.
An excellent call to arms.
And if I can add, some of you may have been in Chelsea in autumn when I was collecting an award, then called SVG out on the single-use plastic that was in the room for the water that was being offered. And I just want to say a really big thank you actually to Will and to SVG, because they heard that and they have really worked hard on this event to totally address every element of this event and look at it from a sustainable angle. And I haven't got the list of everything that you've done, Will, but for example, there's no plastic bottle in my hand to start with, and the menus and everything else have been sourced sustainably. So I want to applaud SVG. They listened, which is brilliant, and have responded fantastically, and they've made it key to the strategy to make sure that wherever possible, they'll keep improving. And I think in turn, Will's keen to acknowledge Tottenham Hotspur's help in making sure that was easy, and actually Spurs have been a fantastic partner for them. So it'd be great if we could give SVG and Spurs a round of applause for responding.
Well done, Will.
I didn't pay him for that. It's very unexpected, and I'd also like to echo the thanks to Tottenham, who have been brilliant. We're out of time. Please join me in thanking the panel for their time and expertise.